Hello and welcome to the 2 Minute Drill podcast. Today we are talking about the trenches, the offensive line, the protectors of your quarterbacks. And this is an interesting class because last year we had plenty of offensive tackles flying off the boards. Definitely still potential for that this year, but there are a lot more uncertain type of prospects heading into this draft. But before we get into anything, that is Dean Bruce. I'm Michael Rochman. Dean, how are you doing today?
I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling good. I'm excited to talk about these trenches. Excited to talk about this class. I feel like I don't know, there's been kind of a lot of talk about how this is a bad offensive line class. And I mean, I don't disagree, but like we're talking about players who can still have big time starting potential. Lots of guys who are, big time athletes. I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, so I think it's similar to the quarterback position where, there's guys and there are definitely candidates to rise up the boards as the season goes along, but a lot of them still have plenty of question marks heading into it. Today we have 15 prospects that we're going to be going over. A lot of them offensive tackles, but some interior guys mixed in. And we're going to get started right away with our 15th ranked guy, and that is Wyatt Millum, offensive tackle for West Virginia. Dean, why don't you start us off with some of your thoughts on Millum during your watch?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard about Milam for a couple years now, and like he's been sort of hyped as one of these big time athlete guys, and he is a really strong mover. He moves well. He's got decent footwork. He can move up to the second level pretty well. But as someone who's seen him pretty much exclusively play offensive tackle and sees his length, he's coming in around probably like 32 inches, something like that. And I'm a big time length truther when it comes to tackle. Like I need guys with long arms who can like trap the corner the defensive linemen and get them stuck in their positions and control the offensive or defensive linemen that way. And I just didn't see a lot of that with Millum. I also thought his strength profile was pretty lacking. I didn't view him as much of a like mauler if he moves into guard. And I don't know, even the athleticism I was like sold on, I found was kind of lacking in comparison to some of the other prospects that we got to view this weekend before the podcast. And I don't know. I just came away disappointed by him. I thought his hand placement was a bit of a wreck. I found him getting off balance every once in a while, which is something I just hate to see ever since the Evan Neal debacle, where he's constantly off balance. It's something I really try to, weight highly in a tackle now. And I didn't see it well with Milam. I sort of have him in an early day three selection range. How are you feeling about him?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's more flash than fluidity when it comes to his athleticism, and that play to play consistency is going to be so important for offensive tackles, especially when it's so dependent on keeping the pocket clean, like consistently throughout a game. I think that's where Milan kind of struggles. He has the ability to pull. I was pretty impressed with that ability. He was able to get outside of the hashes, make some blocks outside of on the outer parts of the field, and I think that's a great aspect in this game. The athleticism is certainly there, and parts of that can be worked out in the NFL, but I think there's issues for me. And yeah, the 32-inch arms is definitely concerning. I don't see enough of functional strength for him to kind of kick inside and really buy into him as this like great pulling guard whenever it comes to that aspect. So I think there's a lack of projection when it comes to the NFL level for where he really fits into that kind of NFL offense and if he can really carve out a career for himself in that regard.
Yeah, with those 32-inch arm guys, you're kind of looking at best case scenario being like a Sam Cosmi type convert where you're going to see someone try to throw Wyatt Milam at tackle, and it's going to go the same way Cosmi did because they're kind of the same type of archetype player where you're looking at a big time athlete who's going to have to make that conversion over. But something I saw with Cosmi that I didn't see with, Milam was he displayed this functional strength against these like big time power rushers. I felt like Milam could handle himself against a speed rusher in his West Virginia tape, but like when it came to guys who were like hitting him with power, I'm trying to think of the guys specifically, they're not coming to mind, but the types of power rushers I was seeing him go up against would push him backwards and he wasn't getting like great movement area on him in the run blocking game. So at that point it was just sort of like ropes. Like what are we going to see like when he gets pushed inside and he even has to operate further inside of a phone booth? Like what are we looking at here?
Yeah. So another guy that kind of struggled with length in terms of the arm distance, that's the reach overall, but was playing tackle Jonah Monheim, now kicking into center for the USC Trojans. A center class that is really kind of missing a top name right now. What were your thoughts on Monheim when watching the Trojans? And do you think kicking inside will kind of help his projection to the NFL?
Yeah, I think he'll be better at center than he is at tackle. I think that sort of like he's a very cerebral player. I felt like I saw him diagnosing stunts pretty consistently, like pointing out guys on the field. I felt like was pretty consistent, and I think that's going to serve him well at center. And I think he again is still one of these really big mover guys. I feel like with a lot of these preseason offensive tackle, like offensive guard center rankings, we're looking at a lot of guys who have these movement skills that NFL GMs are going to covet. But at the end of the day, he's a tackle who's shifting into center, and since I don't have that center tape right now, I felt like it was a bit of projection. I mean, he's pretty flexible. I felt like he was, pretty well consistent, like, getting his knees down and doing the like sort of like choppy footwork that was necessary for a tackle. But I think ultimately, again, if I remember correctly, he's like on the low end of 300s, maybe even still 295. Like it wasn't looking great in terms of like, mass on the guy. So I think again, it'll be better for him at center, but the tackle tape definitely left me with some like need for projection there. I want to see him play center more. We're still diagnosing a guy who's not coming out like currently in the position that he's going to be at in the NFL. He didn't have the length to play tackle. That's fine. He's not going to be there in the NFL. No one's guessing that he's going to be there like they are with Millum. I'm seeing analysts put that guy in tackle. I'm seeing them put Monheim at center, but you know, it's going to be he's going to be someone who has to fit in a movement intensive system because he doesn't have that strength yet, and maybe the S&C programs will do him good, but he doesn't have a lot of like mass to add on to his frame. So I don't know, I'm a little worried he's capped out in terms of strength. That's going to sort of keep him at that like sort of like Luke Weipler type player, like kind of guy who moves around really well but just never quite has that run blocking push that you're looking for in a center in a like outside of a zone blocking scheme.
Yeah, so verified measurements, which can obviously change over the course of the season: 6'4", 305 pounds, 30 and 1/4 inch arms. So the fact that he was lasting out at tackle at college level is pretty impressive, but I do think that it's definitely for the best that he's kicking inside. He has longer shoulders. Like his wingspan, I think, is in the 77-inch type of range. So it's a little bit of a weird type of situation where he has more wingspan than he does arm length, which can be fine, especially on the interior. But he's someone that I am intrigued with. And I think in a center class where there's really a lack of top dog, he has the potential to be that guy. But I mean, right now it's very much all projection because we've seen him only out on the edge. I think at tackle, he did pretty well for the college level. He was highly graded by PFF. He wasn't necessarily as good as the grades indicated, but he was definitely showing some nice flashes. I think the blocking, the instincts, and the athleticism are there. I think the experience of playing on the offensive line is going to be tremendous for him. But yeah, I mean, it's a question now is how are you going to kind of adapt your game to where you're handling the defensive tackles and the nose tackles and trying to take on that type of pressure rather than trying to match speed on the outside. And I think Monheim can do it, but there's easy questions about whether that actually works out for him. But we've seen guys like Barton that were playing left tackle in college for the most part and get drafted to be a center. Obviously, he had some experience at the college level, but it's part of it that some guys just project better inside, and I think Monheim is someone that does that.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think we're looking at a guy who is similar to Graham Barton in that way, and where we're going to, be looking for his like center tape. Like Barton, I felt like his first round hype was especially defined at the Senior Bowl, and I think this year it's going to be whether or not Monheim can hang at center in this, because the USC's moving up in conference this year, so we're going to see him against, top tier edge rushers again, even from even more schools. So, I'm hopeful for him because I think that center class, I agree. I think it needs a top dog, and I don't think there's really one currently that even stands out to me in my like peripheral watches besides the guys who've gone on this list. Like, so if it's going to be Monheim, I think I'll be happy with it. But currently I'm just waiting for that projection to jump.
Yeah, and another guy that is going to be going through a pretty tough schedule, Georgia's Ernest Greene, starting at left tackle for them. There's been talks about him being a potential guard convert at the NFL level. 6'4", 320 pounds. We don't have arm length measurements on him yet because he's an underclassman, a guy that could easily maybe return to school. But when watching him, I thought there was a pretty easy natural thick frame that you can see, and I think he wins at the point of attack well. He has some nice control and engagement that allows him to kind of wipe out defenders and clear lanes in the running game. That Georgia Bulldogs offensive line has a history of just consistently churning out offensive tackles that are highly coveted by the NFL. I'm not sure that Greene is going to have the same level as Broderick Jones and the Amarius Mims type of just upside, but I do think that there is a lot of appeal here to where he's someone that consistently kind of stonewalls defenders and keeps the pocket clean in pass protection. He works upfield well as a run blocker. I think there's flashes to where as long as the length is there, I'm willing to buy into him as an offensive tackle. But it wouldn't surprise me if the guard projections continue and he is someone that maybe at the next level has to kick inside.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that you could probably play him at tackle, partially because he's got that short area quickness where he's not going to be able to, be fought against by speed rushers. But if you put him at guard, he's got power to match that too. I mean, I wasn't the biggest on Ernest Greene. I came away from him like sort of in that like 3 to 4 range on him, like sort of a midday two type. Sort of reminded me of like how Jamari Sawyer was playing with the Chargers. I'm doing some helmet scouting here, but like we're talking about a guy who could play tackle and guard, so that's going to be valuable. You could put him at tackle in a pinch if you need to, if the length come back right. And I mean, he's got that experience, but he's also, a very like explosive blocker. I felt like he was one of the guys who, when I was watching tape, he jumped out to me as far as someone who got out of his like stance quickly and forcefully. Like the hands were out, they were pushing, and he was moving guys. And even at the SEC level, like that's something like that you look for when you're seeing guys who are playing at that high level. If you see a guy who's not only stonewalling guys but moving them backwards, it's a good sign for their future. I just think, again, we talked about it earlier, the balance issue of it. I saw him on the ground a couple times. I felt like he was kind of a little less polished in terms of footwork. He was sort of like keeping his stuff to the ground. He wasn't really consistently like lifting his feet. He was sort of a dragger, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know, but I think we're looking at a guy who next year he's going to be sort of a big dog on that offensive line, and he's going to be one of those guys who you pick up, you put some like mass on him again, and you put him at guard, and you'll be able to push out those running lanes. He can pull too. I felt like I could see that potential on his tape, so I was like, I'm excited for his future. I'm not sure I'm all there yet, but I think next year, if he can keep up that play and make improvements in his balance and his anchor, especially, I think we're going to be looking at a guy who's talking his way into those day two conversations.
Yeah, he's someone for me that was probably one of my more boring watches, and that's not necessarily a bad thing for offensive line play. But he's a guy that is pretty dependable, pretty sturdy, but also just doesn't have necessarily the same amount of flash plays. Flash plays aren't necessarily moving you up the board. There's guys like Trevor Penning where flash plays really showed that it just isn't going to pay off for you. So I like Greene, but I think he's someone that it's going to be easier to kind of dig into the tape once he's in the draft. Whereas right now it's like, all right, like he checks a lot of boxes, but let's see something.
Yeah, the only reason I was grinding him is because we were covering him on the podcast. It feels a little early to be like, oh, this guy's going to be an NFL offensive lineman. I mean, there's time, and there's just a lot of projection with him because he's so young. He's got time to build that technique up.
Yeah, and one guy that is maxed out for his eligibility, Minnesota offensive tackle, Aireontae Ersery, a guy that 6'6", 337 pounds, but also Feldman's freaks list and has a projected or listed 1.52 10-yard split, which is faster than Deshaun Jackson, if that's true, which is incredible. Like, it would be far and away the best offensive tackle time or any offensive lineman time that we've seen at the combine. He has 34 or over 34-inch arms. He has plenty of experience now on the offensive line because this is his 6th year with the Golden Gophers. He's someone that I've had on the watch list for a while, and he's someone that I've kept an eye on, kind of like the technique, but the flashes, but the technique is something that still needs to continue to grow. And entering year 6, I think that's kind of the big holdup is, we've been waiting on that next step, and it hasn't yet happened. There's definitely a lot of great moments where you can buy into Ersery and you're saying, like, this is someone that I can trust on my offensive line, get him with some NFL coaching, and I think he'll get there. Maybe with the right coaching, he can be a star, but at the same time, you've been waiting on this type of play to develop, and it hasn't necessarily reached that next level that you're waiting for. What were your thoughts on Ersery, and do you think that 2024 can be the year where he finally puts it all together?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I like his game. I like the whole like I loved hearing that he was coming out with a 1.52 10-yard split because like seeing him on that freaks list, it totally makes sense, translating from tape because you see him and he's just such a quick mover laterally, even like not because he's not doing a ton of work moving forward because he's playing in that Minnesota scheme where they're just sort of like dropping their guys back. But his back pedal is super effective. I felt like he was constantly like outpacing the defensive ends that he was up against. And I felt like that was, especially impressive because you don't see a lot of tackles who are actively outrunning these like big time speed rushers and like, able to match them in power too. I mean, could he do a little better about letting guys do his chest? Certainly. I felt like his hand placement was at times a little wonky. I felt like he would sort of get tangled up in his own feet because he's moving so fast. Like he's sort of a runaway train, if that makes sense. Like you're looking at a guy who has this crazy speed, these like quick breaks, this great footwork, but he's just not quite in control of his own body because he's 6'6". Like he's 6'6", like 315? Like he's a big boy and he has to like move like a in these like quick moments. And I think he's still trying to pick up those, those quicks and like the rushers, like, and make sure that his arms are moving at the same time as his legs. Like if he can put together coordination, I think he's easily a first round tackle. But right now he's not coordinated enough to me where I'm like, oh, this guy's gonna blow away everyone and be a top 10 pick like some of the other guys we're gonna talk about later. But do I see the potential there? Do I see him as sort of like a Kingsley Swamataia type athletic like freak who just needs to like be more polished up in like uh the technique regard? Totally. Like, but Swamataia also was a 3-year junior. This guy's a 6-year senior. If we're still waiting on this to come together, what are GMs thinking when he's gonna be like what, 23 coming out? Like that's a little scary. Like I don't know. I see him sort of like if he doesn't make those improvements, there's going to be a guy who still takes a chance off him on that combine performance that's going to come in because I think he's running 4.8s probably, like no doubt. But if he can't get his footwork in sync with his like pushing those hands out, I think it's going to be difficult for me to like view him as anything more than a flyer on day 2 that you're hoping for upside out of.
Yeah, he has some really natural power, which I think is very intriguing for him. But I think it kind of helped him keep up with some bad habits. He's so easily like able to control his blocks where there's times where he is off kiltered, off balance, and making his defender clear out of the way and keeping the space of lanes or pocket clean. And I think that allows him to kind of have some sloppy hand work, and that's what you were talking about as well, where his leverage just kind of goes away and he shoots high with his hands, and it results in a lot of balance issues where he is way too high on the defender and they're able to get underneath him and get into the backfield. So once he kind of irons that out, I think there will be a lot of big strides in his play. And I think I kind of tossed him in like a Patrick Paul bucket where there's definitely flash and there's potential, but there's still a lot left to be figured out. But I mean, with all the tools, I think NFL teams are still willing to bet on it.
Someone's going to take him. It'll probably be in the first 3 rounds.
Yeah. So moving on now to our next guy, and that is Josh Conerly, a guy that we are very split on because I actually had him ranked as my 15th lineman. Dean had him all the way up as his 4th ranked lineman. Dean, I'll let you take the lead on this one with your thoughts on him.
Look, Conerly's just the second best. I would say he's probably the second or top athlete on this list. Like for a guard, that guy is moving. Like it wouldn't shock me if he comes in at 4.8s at like same speed as Ersery, run it like with 330 pounds because he's moving guys. He's using that strength. He's using this speed to power like technique type stuff that really excited me because it reminded me of like defensive ends. He's countering them the same way that like defensive ends are going in with him. So he's able to get this like first sign of engagement, which is something I love to see as a guard. I like to see guards sort of beat the defensive ends to the punch. And I think he does that with just this overwhelming athleticism. And I felt like, he sort of like, I don't know, I was just blown away by his athleticism. I felt like his power was really strong too. I felt like he's going to convert to guard really well. I think like, the whole like, is he going to be able to like keep his lower body in check and like keep that anchor? Because I think again, a lot of these guys who are really fast coming off the line are also, a little choppier in terms of footwork. But I think his 2 flaws for me being footwork and hand placement, 2 things that are just effectively coached at the NFL level. We've seen a lot of guys with wonky hand placement coming out of the like college game and moving into the NFL, and it's just gone by preseason. And that's something I was thinking about as I was watching these preseason games this last couple weekends. And then watching Conerly, I was like, his hand placement is totally all over the place. And like at times he's like just straight up grabbing onto guys and getting them by the shoulders. But if you can get him with an offensive line coach who's teaching this technique and he's able to like get it through his head, because I worry at times that like Michigan and Oregon, those are two places that sort of, I mean, they pump out O linemen, but it felt like last year a lot of those guys were coming in through the transfer portal and didn't make huge steps. That was sort of a issue I had with Ladarius Henderson last year, was his grabbiness, and it just never changed. But if like if Conerly can sort of fix these bad habits at the NFL level, where I don't trust him as much to do it at the college level, like then we're looking at a guy who's going to be a top 5 guard in the league. I'm gonna like because that athleticism and that strength combined is going to make something just truly special.
Yeah, so I'd say the strength is probably where we vary the most because I thought it was an issue for him. I thought the anchor had some problems when it came to handling power, and I really kind of questioned the projection for him moving inside because of that. And that's where I kind of hold up because he was a highly coveted offensive tackle recruit, and he's done well for Oregon. Obviously, the hype is there, and he's someone that may stick at tackle if the length is there and the play continues to produce. But I think he's someone that probably kicks inside. He's 6'4", 305 pounds, so a little light. The athleticism is easy to notice. I agree 100% with you there. I think he's got some really nice flash. He moves around well. He drops into his sets and he pulls as a run blocker, gets into the second level with really nice urgency. So he's someone that I really like as an athlete. But I think the play strength is something that I'm still kind of questioning on. Sometimes it's more just like I want to see more push in the run game. Sometimes it's just handling the power and letting guys into his chest, which could be more of a handwork issue and getting that fixed. But I don't know. I still want to see a lot more out of him. I think there is still a lot of questions when it comes to him and Cornelius actually for the Oregon offensive line, where I still want to see some big steps if I want to buy into them more as NFL prospects. But I do think they're very good college offensive tackles. They're going to be in for a very nice year with the Ducks, and I think the Ducks are going to be one of the better teams in college football, which usually that type of success is, kind of correlated to where it's like, oh yeah, this team is really good, and we're seeing that type of continued increase in play from the offensive line as well. And so it wouldn't surprise me if he's someone that takes a major step forward because he is a younger guy, he's a third-year junior, so very easily could be on a development track that helps him kind of find a stride in year 3. But I don't know. There's still a lot of question marks for me from the 2023 tape that I want to see more improvement on.
Yeah, I understand. Even though I am higher on him, I think I get it. I think the upper body and the lower body strength profiles are very different. I thought him getting like push on the opposite end of the like defense was just very strong. I was very excited about him like coming out of this because he was someone I hadn't looked at because he was an underclassman, and you know I think there's something there. I don't know. I just get the good vibe off of him. I can't explain it any other way than that. I just think
Yeah,
there's that athleticism is going to be something crazy.
the potential is there for sure. And he's someone that I think is going to be an exciting name to track through the year and could potentially be one of the top linemen when it's all said and done. Uh, Actually, I went out of order. I apologize for that. So the next up on the list was supposed to be Anthony Belton, but we'll talk about him now. A senior for North Carolina State. Pretty sure his eligibility is completely maxed out. He's a guy that is very exciting though because he's someone that has 6'6", 336-pound frame, 35 and 1/4 inch arms, so very lengthy. And those vines are very easy to notice on tape. He's got some really nice strength, some nice power, and some nice torque when it comes to his ability to block and clear out space. When it comes to move blocking or just getting into his pass sets, he's someone that still is another one of those guys. Like the athleticism and the tools and the measurements are all there, but the technique is still kind of lacking. We saw some flashes. This is a guy that's been on my radar for about 3 years now. I was kind of hyping him up, very raw. Then this last year, there was more hype for him. Still kind of raw. And now we enter this third year of hype, third year of draft talk after replacing Ekwonu on the offensive line for the Wolfpack. I think he's someone that can take that step. I think the measurements are there. I know the NFL already likes him. I think they had like a second, third round grade on him last offseason. I'm intrigued to see what happens for him. But what were your thoughts when watching Belton on tape?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the same boat. I've probably been keeping track of him for 2 years, and every year it's like, oh man, this guy can really move, but he can't quite play offensive tackle at a consistent rate. Like he's sort of. We were talking about Penning earlier as a guy who sort of had those flashy highlight plays where he's moving bodies, and Belton sort of reminded me of Penning in that way, where he's got these flashy plays where he's moving bodies, but even in those flashy plays, there's a lot of bad habits where he's not quite getting his hands at the right spot. He shoots his hands really low, or he's just like not really he's not really stacking his body correctly. It just feels like at times he's uncoordinated. He's sort of like lost in the sauce at times. Like you'll get these plays where everything clicks and he's coming at you like a freight train. But then you get these plays where it's like, okay, he's like hard to work around, but he's not super hard to work through just because he's not setting his anchor right, or he's got his hands all the way up and he completely whiffs on a block. Like there's plays where you're like, oh, everything is connected. He's moving at top speed and he's knocking guys down. But there's other plays where everything is connected and he's 2 feet to the left and he's gone. Like it's a tale of like peaks and valleys with Belton, and it's been that way for like both years I've watched him. Like, you're looking at a guy who I totally see why the NFL's got these second and third round grades on him, because he's a crazy athlete with great frame, big mass, and like crazy long arms. But you also see why like he hasn't declared yet, because he's sort of, hoping to develop into a first round tackle because he's got the frame to do so. But I don't know, it feels like that time hasn't come. It could be this year, but it felt like last year, if there was going to be a time for when he would make the jump now that Ekwonu was out of the way and he could play sort of that tackle guard flex that Ekwonu was doing, that was going to be the time. It didn't quite happen. So are we looking at someone who is going to make that sort of, late in the game step forward and really impress these NFL evaluators? Or are we looking at a guy who's just a little bit past his prime and isn't going to take that first round step? I'm sort of torn on that. I probably put him like second round range on him.
Yeah, I have him in the second, third round, but it wouldn't shock me if this is a guy that the NFL really likes. And I think there's going to be more tape to back it up this year. The ability to engulf defenders is somewhat of an underrated trait when it comes to athletes like this. And I think he has that ability thanks to his length, natural size, and just the ability to kind of show that short area speed. He's someone that I think has everything you're looking for in an offensive tackle. Now it's just about putting it all together, like you said. And I think it's going to happen, but again, it's a lot easier said than done. And there's a lot of guys that you're kind of counting on for that, but not necessarily all of them make it happen in the NFL.
Yeah, it just is what it is. It's a tale of development.
So moving on now to the next offensive tackle, and that is Jack Nelson from Wisconsin. He's a guy that I think is very intriguing when it comes to the overall draft prospect, because I feel like he has a higher floor than most of these guys when it comes to just dependable play. 33-inch arms, which I think some people will have some issues with, but 6'7", 316 pounds. I think he's a pretty nice mover. He gets around outside pretty well. He pulls into the second level. That Wisconsin run blocking heritage continues on with Nelson. He's a guy that I think is very scrappy. He gets after it in his engagements, and he continues to turn his legs, and it helps him clear out space. I think he covers the ground well as a pass blocker. He's someone that I gave a second round grade to. I think he's one of the more safe options when it comes to this tackle class. There's a lot of guys that I think could pass him up if those steps kind of happen. But with Nelson, I feel like there's less of a gambling process when it comes to what happens for his projection, and more what you see is what you'll be pretty comfortable with at the NFL level.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think he's like the key word for Jack Nelson is reliable. I think a lot of like what he does is just sort of, he's not someone who I think was sort of moving guys in a flashy way like some of the other guys we've already talked about previously, but he's a guy who I think he's more of a wall than a bulldozer. I think I was reading some other like reports and I was like, okay, I saw that he had been in that Wisconsin run offense, but long ago it just switched to an air raid spread. I'd seen that in, I think that's a TDN like report. And I was like, oh, that totally makes sense because he's super balanced. He's just a guy who's just good at both aspects. He's very reliable at both aspects. I was very happy with like, he's not the best at any like trait. He doesn't have a super standout trait, but I felt like he's just a very solid technician. His hands are generally in the right place. He's turning his legs pretty well. He moves pretty well. I thought that whole Wisconsin offensive line was pretty well coached. I think we'll probably touch on that in the sleepers video. But I thought he was a beneficiary of a particularly well coached and well balanced offensive line. I felt like, when the pass blocking time was come, his feet were moving and he was able to get to the outside and, protect his chest from these, big pass rush moves. And on a run blocking technician, he was able to, keep guys in their place and, move sort of like angle himself directionally to where I was like, okay, he's clearing out holes still. He can push stuff outside. If he needs to move to guard, it feels like he's able to. I was sort of in the third round range on him just because I like to see flash. I'm kind of a like highlight real brained type of evaluator.
Especially in the preseason, that's more
Mhm.
understandable.
Yeah, but I think there's something there. It wouldn't shock me if he's like a solid starter for like 11 years. Like just seems like that kind of guy. Just a strong, solid technician. Never maybe never a top 10 guy because just of limiting factors in athleticism and length, but someone who you could throw out there, get him to start a few games. You'll be happy with him. He's not gonna lose you any games.
Yeah, and I think what he deserves the most credit for is a lot of these guys that we're talking about when it's the leverage issues, it's like 6'6" or above. This guy's 6'7", but he gets so low to the ground. You'd almost be convinced that he's like undersized because he gets so low. But he's someone that is consistently staying down, taking advantage of leverage, and finding ways to clear out defenders as a result. He's someone that I'm excited for this Wisconsin team that enters year 2 with the new era underway. So I'm excited for them. I think they got a lot of potential on the offensive line. And I think Jack Nelson is obviously the headliner name for it. But moving forward now to our next offensive lineman, and that is Blake Miller, offensive tackle at Clemson, a guy that is 6'6", 311 pounds. What were your thoughts on Miller when checking him out for the Tigers?
Yeah, I mean, Blake Miller, I think the big concern that people were having with him is he's a little undersized, but I think ultimately what really I was excited about was his length. I think he absorbs contact well, and I think he plays super, low to the ground like we were talking about with Jack Nelson, and I think that length is a big part of why he's able to keep guys in such solid control. I felt like he was one of the most like I'm trying to think of the way like he kind of corralled guys almost like he used his arms sort of like lassos but he wasn't playing at such a high level where he was grabbing them. He was still pushing them within his chest. It was kind of refreshing to see it when we're seeing a lot of shift towards maulers in the NFL. I don't know. I was really happy with him. I thought his movement skills were strong. I felt like he was still even able to you know be kind of he's not super like a mauler, but he always plays to the end of his rep. Like he was never a guy who I was like, oh, he's given up on that. The guy's getting past him. He plays to the end of the whistle. He's sort of that kind of guy. I mean, he's a little limited in the lower body, I think. Like just in terms of anchor, I felt like sometimes he was losing battles he didn't need to because he just wasn't he's like, isn't he 290? Like he's kind of small. Am I
They
wrong?
list him at 311, but he could easily be a little bit under that. The school sites love to kind of gas those
Yeah.
numbers up a bit.
I felt like I like looking at him, he doesn't have it felt like he didn't have a ton of muscle on the frame. I was guessing he was undersized for that reason, but I came away pretty solid on him. I think I had him at what? I had him fifth on our list. It felt like a breath of fresh air to see a guy who was both playing to the end of the whistle on every rep and also was able to, like win with more than just strength. It wasn't like these preseason guys. It feels like we're getting a lot of these high strength, high speed type guys, and he's just a very solid technician who knows what to do with his arms. And I know that hand placement and stuff is something that is taught very frequently at the NFL offensive line level, and if that's sort of his hallmark, it could worry that we don't have a high upside on him. But I was just it was very nice to see a guy who was as technically refined as him watching the tape this week.
Yeah, I felt his hands were very powerful, and when he landed them, he showed some obvious impact with that. But the overall strength for me was kind of the question mark, and I think you kind of had similar thoughts with the undersized thoughts. It was just kind of I don't know. There were times where he was dealing power as an anchor, and it just did not work for him in the past sets. So I think there's still some issues in that regard, but I think there's some dependability with this play to where I think he can be someone that is really kind of putting himself on the map. I think he's someone that's sort of risen through the offseason and is now kind of being talked about with some of the names like Campbell and Banks as top offensive tackles in this class. It wouldn't shock me if he's one of the guys that sticks around in this class. I think there's a lot of change and movement that we're going to see with the rankings as the year progresses. But Miller's one of those guys that I think has kind of consistently been pretty solid for the Tigers, and I think he's going to continue to be that. I don't know if there's as much flash that I see the appeal of like top 5, top 10 type of pick. I think he's more of someone that continues that steady type of play, continues to be pretty reliable, and I could see him being like a day 2 selection, maybe late day 1. And that's not necessarily a knock on him. Some of those guys like the Jake Matthews in the league, not necessarily a comp, but just like that type of play style where it's like that performance is consistent, steady, helps him stick around in the league for a long time as a dependable tackle, but maybe never gets the recognition as one of the top guys in the league at the position because some of these other guys really kind of whooping butt out in their engagements. And I do like Miller. I think there's definitely moments where he shows that he has that in his tool set, but I don't know. I think there's still some steps in terms of play strength and just overall control in his blocks that I still want to see from him.
Yeah, I think that top 10 upside might not be there, but I mean, we had a friend in our circles who was comparing him to Brian O'Neill, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Sort of that top 12, 15-ish guy who's very dependable but nothing crazy, and is sort of like just sort of a guy you can rely on but never is like really a blindside protector that's just super reliable. I see the vision.
So next up on our list, we're going back to the inside, and that's offensive guard Donovan Jackson for Ohio State, a guy that really entered the year with plenty of upside and potential and hype, sort of had it fall down the ranks a little bit, ended up returning back to Ohio State. I turned on the tape expecting a little bit of regression in his play. I didn't watch every single game for the Buckeyes, but I watched a few, and I continue to be impressed with him. I thought he's someone that is a really nice mover with some really nice strength. He's 6'4", 318 pounds with over 34-inch arms. So everything in terms of measurements is there for him. He's someone that I think clears out space with power. He can anchor down as pass protector. He can clear out space in rushing lanes. He's also someone that moves into the second level extremely well. I have some clips that I've made over the years where he's pulling out outside the tackles and getting up into the second level, up to the secondary, and just laying out some really impressive blocks. So he's someone that I really like, and I'm continuing to be optimistic on, and I think he's going to continue to rise up the ranks again and sort of reestablish the hype that was there for him, especially for a very good Ohio State team that's going to probably rely on the run game nonstop this season. What are your thoughts on Jackson and watching him, and what do you think for him in this offensive guard class?
Yeah, I mean, if there's any guy who's going to benefit from a sort of shift in team model, it's going to be him with, Judkins and Henderson both. I mean, Judkins is transferring in, Henderson's coming back. That's a team that's going to be run heavy, especially because I don't really trust Will Howard. I think if there's any sort of 5-year senior who has an opportunity to break out this year, it's going to be Donovan Jackson. I think I agree that he's sort of a consistently great, anchor down guy in pass protection and like mover in run blocking. I think really what sort of worried me is sometimes he'll play out over his skis. He's a little bit of a he's very eager to get that firsthand contact. And I like that in a guy, but sometimes it results in a lack of coordination. But I think ultimately he's just a very strong player. And I mean that both in the muscle way and I mean that in like the actual he's just good. Like he's one of those guys who maybe wasn't as like highlight reel as he was just a straight up protector all the time. He was constantly getting people away from the ball carrier, whether it was from forming a pocket that um, got the guy like Ohio State's guys could work within, or it was a guy who could push out running lanes. I was very happy with him. I wasn't shocked that he didn't declare last year, partially because I think Ohio State had a bit of a disappointing run last year with McCord. But we're looking at a guy who I think ultimately is going to be about as good in college as he is, or about as good in the pros as he is in college, because there's just not much he needs to change about his game. He's a very strong player. He's a very, decent mover. I just don't think I see the highs of top end athleticism and top end strength that I think maybe you do. I think maybe I see more of just a solid above average guy in all respects. And those are guys who can certainly stick around in the league, but I think that's ultimately why he ended up a little lower for me than he did for you, just because he's you know, different athleticism judging. I was just this is a guy who is definitely ready to be at the NFL level, but he's not going to blow guys away at the NFL level. I think, we're looking at a guy who, is going to be a starter for a team somewhere, but I don't know, sort of in the same boat for me with Blake Miller, like similar vibes where I was like, yeah, this guy can be very dependable. He's not someone I ever worry about like blowing a block or completely like falling on his ass like some of the other guys we had lower, but like I never was like consistently wowed by him. I think that's probably why he didn't come out last year. He didn't have these highlight reel plays, but I think his PFF grade was pretty strong because I mean, but I think also he'll benefit from having a quarterback who isn't McCord this year, who I think McCord had some struggles making quick decisions and it resulted in sort of creating pressures he didn't have to. And Jackson kind of looked worse because of it. I don't know. I'm excited to see what the game for Ohio State's like whole football team looks like now that Judkins and Henderson are the stars and maybe some of the passing game is taking the backseat. I think if Day can adjust to that and Jackson can like be a big time guy for them, who's sort of the unsung hero of that team.
Yeah, Buckeyes are in for a big year, and Jackson's going to be a big part of it on a very exciting offensive line that we may talk about some of the other guys in tomorrow's episode. I don't know. Keep an eye out for it. But look, there are some other pieces and other teams out there that are going to be in for big years as well. And one of them is the Texas Longhorns. And we have Kelvin Banks next up, a guy that probably we're a little lower on compared to the consensus opinion. He's someone that's talked about as a potential top 10 pick, one of the top offensive tackles in this class. Unfortunately, we didn't see him in that same light. I do think that there's potential here. 6'4", 320. The length is going to be the big question mark. If he has over 33-inch arms, I think there's going to be a lot of people who believe in his ability to stick around at offensive tackle. But overall, I mean, I don't know. There were some nice moments where he shows like great athleticism, fluid feet. He's really nice and nimble with the ability to kind of recover and make up for any missteps that he has. But there are a lot of moments where he gets way too off of his base, and it results in some really easy to notice issues in terms of play strength and just ability to kind of handle power on the outside. I think he's a great offensive lineman. It's no question for me that he's going to be a good offensive lineman in the NFL. It's just now whether that's going to be a tackle or guard. And I think that if he's stuck at tackle and forced to play in that area, there could be some issues that kind of hinder his development and maybe ruin his confidence and maybe put him on the wrong track in the NFL. So I don't know. He's working with Kyle Flood, one of the best offensive line coaches in college football. I really like that for him. And I think that, that definitely projects well for him being a first-round pick. I wouldn't bet against that. But I'm definitely a little bit lower on him compared to some of the other top offensive tackles that maybe have a little bit more to offer in terms of upside and just overall natural traits that.
I mean, shorter in both ways. He's 6'4". I'm looking for guys to be 6'6". I looked at him and I'm like, yeah, that's a guard, huh? Yeah. I mean, if we're projecting him into offensive tackle, he's gonna have that movement, that footwork is gonna be really special for him there. But I think ultimately, when I was looking at him, I was like, I bet this guy probably gets 8 games at tackle and they give up on him and move him to guard and just hope for the best. And if we're looking at him long term as a guard, I think that a lot of his like balance issues are really going to come back to bite him fighting strength. I think Flood is going to be a big there we go. I think Flood's going to be a big player in making sure that he gets all his coordination back together because I think when it comes down to it, he is a guy who has these, big moments of strength, these big moments where he can move around and like just absolutely, destroy guys when he's moving with a full head of steam. But I think at times, like, he just gets fooled by like simple lateral movements or head fakes from defensive linemen. Like sometimes I'll look at him and a guy will like sort of fake to his outside, he'll bite on it, it's gone. Ewers is on the move now. Like it's sort of like a tale of ups and downs, peaks and valleys. Like I think we're looking at a guy who, if he can play consistently at his highest level, is going to be a first round talent, no doubt. But if Flood can't keep him, poised and sort of get his body composition back to where I would want it to be, get him in his stance correctly, and get him where he's using this strength profile to its best potential, I think we're looking at a guy who we could see sliding down boards this like upcoming draft cycle. I don't know. I'm a little worried for his future. I'm definitely not as high as him as other guys in the media are, but I see the potential. I see the flashes, just maybe he's not all there yet.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of questions on like balance and strength, but he does show some nice moments for it to where there's reason to be optimistic about him. And he's also just a highly coveted high school recruit. And I think a lot of that kind of translates where it's like high school recruit that was highly coveted, success at a big program. He's a great college football tackle. So as long as he kind of continues that for Longhorns, there's definitely going to be continued hype for him for an NFL projection. But moving forward, for a guy that maybe wasn't so coveted at the high school level, went to San Jose State, Fernando Carmona, transferred over to Arkansas this offseason, going to be working with Sam Pittman at left tackle, 6'5", 324 pounds. This was a guy, look, I hate to be selfish on this show, but this is someone that I discovered this guy. I don't care what anyone says. I discovered this guy last year against USC in week 1, week 0, whichever it was. And I was telling everyone, keep an eye out for him. I went into this offseason and I was like, you know what? I'm all in on Carmona. And then the hype just started to build more and more for him. He started showing up earlier in mocks. He started getting into the ranks. Now we have to put him on the top offensive lineman rather than in the sleeper section. It's ridiculous. ridiculous. But look, this guy is an absolute bowling ball when it comes to his training. He has great just bulkiness and size and length, and he does it all. He's someone that is very quick-footed, but also has power to just completely maul defenders. I think there is still a lot of technique that needs to kind of come up and show up in the tape. But working with a guy like Sam Pittman, I really trust it to kind of eventually reach that point and put himself on the map in NFL draft circles. This is probably one of the bigger range of outcomes type of guys on this list. I think he's someone that there's a lot of projection involved, but there was a lot of attention in him for the transfer portal, and now he enters into the draft discussion. I think he's very exciting.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, I was there, like I was around when you discovered him. I heard you talking about him before anyone else. I'll play along. I think it was you. I think you did it. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you all the way too. I mean, I'm not quite as high as you are, but I think that strength showed. I think he's just sort of, you build a guy in a lab, and you're looking at like the types of traits you want. You want Carmona's strength. He's what, 6'5"? You'll take his size. He's 315. Like, and he's got that length. I mean, I'm pretty sure he's going to come in, what, 34.5 inches would have been my guess. Yeah, like around there. He's got the tackle length. He's kind of the guy you want to see out on the field. If you're putting together like an NCAA recruit, you want a guy with that size. You could play him at tackle. He's strong enough where you could play him at guard. He's got like massive, like second, like power level strength. He's just kind of a mutant in that regard. He's big, he's muscly, he's strong. He moves his feet well. He comes off the snap with like this sort of like jump and push. Like he's not losing his stance. I was very happy with him. I think there's some technique issues, obviously, because he's if you had to pick a guy who I said was most likely on our list to go back and become a first rounder next year, I think Carmona is probably that guy for me, because he still like has some trouble letting guys into his chest. And I think at times he does a little better when he's in the phone booth than he does when he's outside of it. I think like guys like who he has to like adjust his angle to get like squared up on, sometimes he has a little bit of trouble doing that, and that could come back to bite him if people learn how to do these counters for him. But it also wouldn't shock me if he's above some of the other media darlings. I mean, there's a reason we're talking about him after we're talking about Kelvin Banks, because to me, I think Carmona may have the better like strength and athletic framework when you put them all together like that. I don't know. I think you found a gem here, and I think it's clear that media is catching in on it because, like, he's just a great framework of a guy. I mean, he could do some improvements, sort of keeping his feet under him, just like a lot of these guys who are like learning their position, maybe a little bit of balance issues, maybe a little bit of like keeping that chest protected and keeping your arms like ahead of you where they need to be and not like up on the shoulders. But I was excited about him when you showed him to me, and I'm excited about his prospects now. So hey, I'm all in.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give him some credit. I guess he probably got himself discovered more so than some YouTube channel with like 7,000 subs. But you know what? Hey,
let's pretend.
I'm gonna pretend like I'm the reason this guy got any attention, and I'll ride it all the way home. I'm just happy that some of my dark horse shots are actually getting some recognition now, some proper credit. But yeah, I mean, this is someone that I think the biggest issue right now is just kind of working on those counters. He's someone that has the speed to match outside and inside and power to match inside. But I think when he kind of matches that inside ability, he goes too heavily with his mirror attempt, and it leaves him prone to leaving up some really bad moments when they kind of counter that and head back inside with their swim moves or whatever. And that balance kind of becomes more prevalent whenever you're watching tape. But it's something that I think can be worked out. And I think, again, I really like Pittman as an O-line developer, so I trust that he's going to be able to kind of help him take that next step as an offensive lineman. But moving forward now to our next guy, and that is Will Campbell, a lot of people's top guy at the offensive tackle position, 6'6", 319 pounds, 32 and 7/8 inch arms, close to 33. So there's going to be people who are perfectly fine with him at offensive tackle, but there are going to be some people who automatically below the 33-inch mark, they're out on him. But there were some real issues on tape that weren't just about length. I think there's some issues in terms of leverage. His lower half is struggling with flexibility. He's very stiff when it comes to his hips and just ability to get low, and I think that hurts him when it comes to trying to take away the base of his defense. I think the athleticism's there. He has the movement skills and just the overall play strength and punch power that you want to see out of a premier offensive tackle. He's one of the best guys in the country at the position for a reason. Like, this is a very good offensive lineman. But I think there is sort of that question of, hey, when you're trying to survive out on the edge, when you're working against the Danielle Hunters and the Myles Garretts and the TJ Watts, how are you going to handle those matchups where you have to be a lot better in terms of everything needs to have a certain level of refinement. There needs to be more athleticism in your play when it comes to just the ability to kind of work those matchups and take advantage of their like leverage and stuff like that. And I think that's where Campbell kind of has his shortcomings. I think he's going to be someone that remains a highly coveted person in this draft process, but I'm not as confident in his projection to the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who we saw betting odds come out on the top overall pick the other day. He was on them. I wouldn't take that bet. Like, personally, he's not even the best offensive tackle on his own team. We'll get to that later. But that doesn't mean he's not a very good offensive tackle. I mean, that athleticism is still like very strong. I think his strength profile is really good. I think for the most part, he's able to hold his own. I think he's sort of like when he's not having those leverage issues, when he's up in his stance, when he's like sort of keeping his feet under him and like moving them and like keeping them quick under him, and he's like establishing a base that is actually functional and not sort of getting walked back a couple inches. Like, he has these moments where he's pre-backpedaling his plays that I think is really funny because he already knows he needs to get some time back before he loses ground. But like, I think ultimately, really, I'm a length truther. It's going to be difficult to sell me on a 32 and 3/4 inch arm length tackle, but that doesn't mean I don't respect his game. I think he's got some great athletic traits. He's got a strength profile that I think a lot of guys who are coming out into the NFL draft this year would be really like happy with having of their own. And I think his flexibility is being a little underrated. I think he uses his hips well. I think like as far as like being able to like square up well with guys who are coming at him and trying to like get on the inside, I think that's pretty strong. And I think when he's lined up against these like sort of bigger dudes where I kind of like, if he moves to guard, he's going to be up against these sort of like at low end 280-pound guys more often. I think he held his own in a power perspective because he was able to absorb that anchor and keep his base. It's just that matter of leverage. I think whether he's going to be able to become someone who can take the first contact and win the rep at the snap, he's not currently that guy. And that's worrying for a guy who's getting number 1 projections. But later down the board, that's something you can take a chance on. I think I know you hated Jordan Morgan, but I liked Jordan Morgan a decent bit. He became a first rounder. There's some Jordan Morgan-esque energy coming off of Campbell for me, where it's like, he kind of has this like tackle athleticism, but he's got some guard strength, and he's a little better playing at power than I think he is playing against guys who are more technically refined and using these moves on him because his leverage just gets blown out. But I think he'll probably still be a first rounder by the end of the draft cycle. I just don't think he's someone you should really be placing your bets on to go number 1 overall. I mean, like when we watch the next season, we're going to see that there's better guys in the SEC. There's better guys on that team. I'm not lost on Will Campbell, but I'm not like super moved by him either.
Yeah, and I think one thing that happens when you talk about this 33-inch mark is, okay, so is he like the next Skoronski? But I think Skoronski had a lot of athleticism that kind of made the appeal more so just like there for him. And that nimbleness and flexibility was definitely a strength of Skoronski's game. Whereas Campbell has that issue. We've seen leverage issues in the past. And it's not like a big deal. It's nothing to write off a prospect about. But that leverage has to be like shown that it can be fixed. And the flexibility for Campbell is really where I have that big concern. How are you going to be able to manage being able to be like an athlete that is nimble and be able to kind of work your way in angles that maybe aren't favorable for you? That's something that we're going to have to see this season. And maybe it won't be something that we know about and feel confident about as he heads into the NFL, but it's something that kind of adds some cloudiness to his NFL projection that will be interesting to kind of sort of see everything resolve and see what the ultimate projection and how he ends up at the NFL level is. But I think he's someone that still ends up top half of the first round. It just wouldn't shock me if this is someone that maybe ends up a guard in the NFL. So moving forward to our next offensive lineman, we have Arizona right tackle, has some guard experience in his bag as well. Jonah Savaiinaea, the offensive lineman for the Wildcats, that is 6'5", 330 pounds. Expected to be 33-inch arms. I think that's kind of the big question mark for whether people are going to project him at offensive tackle or guard. I think there's a lot of flaga in this guy's game. I think the just tenacious run blocking ability, the burst when it comes to exploding into the second level is there. He's very aggressive as a blocker, and I think that kind of helps him kind of just eliminate defenders in the pass and running game. I really liked him. This is someone that I watched as a true freshman, and I pinpointed him as someone that I think could easily end up on draft radars when his time comes. I didn't know that he was going to be someone that kicked outside, but he made it work for right tackle for the Wildcats. A lot of people were kind of critical on his first season outside at the tackle position, but I think that's something that for a young third-year player now, second year for his film last year, first year at tackle, I think the growing pains are okay, and I think he showed plenty to where I feel comfortable in him as a tackle right now, at least expect him to be that. If the arm length comes in with more issues, or there's issues that continue over into 2024, then yeah, I'll entertain the idea of kicking him inside more. But people are so quick to tell a good tackle prospect, oh, he'd be better at guard, and then we just have no tackles left. I think that this is an offensive tackle. I think he's a very fun right tackle. He's someone that is going to be a very good run blocker, no doubt in my mind. It's just now getting that technique and consistency play to play that could really unlock him and unleash him for the next level.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to a guy who wants to write him off at guard right now. I'm not going to. I think the Fuaga comparison is fair. I think Savaiinaea is going to be a guy who, like Fuaga, that mass and that like explosive ability is going to carry him outside of those guard conversations. I think just it's good to see a guy who has that high quality of an anchor. It felt like when I was going through a lot of guys this year, like coming into this podcast, we were seeing a lot of dudes who were, very athletic, but couldn't necessarily be that stonewall when their feet are down. And I felt like Savaiinaea was definitely more, like not acclaimed, but like more proficient in that area than a lot of the other guys we're talking about today. Do I think he would be a fucking kick-ass guard? Absolutely. I think he'd be great there. That's where his skill set's at. He's a great run blocker. He keeps his like heavy feet down. He's got the length for it. And I think he's generally able to just really keep guys like in his range. I think he uses the limited length he has very well, which is why I think he can still play tackle. I think it's with these guys who are in the 33 range where they're sort of on that borderline of tackle guard. I think it's about how well you use the length and how much your strength profile is going to carry you. And I don't think he's being carried by that strength profile. I think that strength profile is just a great part of his game. I think, he's going to have some maybe issues where he's a little bit like grabby. I think I've talked about this earlier where guys are just sort of like clutching at jerseys when it comes down to it because they're just so excited to get a guy in their clutches and push him back that they sort of lose their hands and their technique when they get down to it. But I think if he can clean up some of that grabbiness and get rid of some of those bad tendencies when it comes to getting too far ahead of himself when the snap is coming, where he's just sort of punching out, he's getting his arms out and his arms are just sort of getting squinched into his body. I think there's times where he can lose himself to power because of it. Even though he's matching the power, he's just sort of a little too far over his legs in that regard. But at the end of the day, I think he could be a very strong tackle. I think he'd be a great guard. I think his upside might be a little better at guard, but I think he could be a very high quality tackle for a team if they wanted to play him that way, especially if they're a team. Maybe I think honestly, if the Steelers are still going to try and throw out Dan Moore and they don't think Broderick Jones is any better and they want to take another tackle next year, I think he'd be a great fit for that Steelers offense next year. But I kind of also understand not wanting to give up on that new O-line yet. So, but that was where I saw him. I was just like, yeah, if you put him on that Arthur Smith O-line where they're doing all those power shenanigans, yeah, let's put him out there. Let's let him push guys down. Let's let him anchor down, give a QB a good pocket and give those running lanes complete openings. he's going to be a guy who we talk about as like a first round prospect this year. I think it's good in his future.
Yeah, that's one thing that I love about Savaiinaea was that he was so quick off the snap that it helped him reach the point of attack with ease, and it made him just so controlling in his blocks. He's someone that I have a first round grade on him. I'm not afraid to kind of give him that projection and maybe be a little more optimistic on him. Whether that's at guard or offensive tackle, I think he's someone that's going to contribute. It wouldn't shock me if this is someone that we're talking about as a Dallas Cowboy. Honestly, I think if you're looking for like a Zach Martin replacement, I think Jerry would love this guy. But we'll see. There's still a lot of time, and maybe he's someone that is up the boards a lot higher than a lot of people expect right now. But I think he's someone that could be day one type pick, and I think the upside and ability is certainly there for him. So moving forward now to your number one offensive lineman prospect, Tyler Booker, offensive guard for Alabama, 6'4", 348 pounds. So definitely a lot of power behind him. What were your thoughts when watching him? And give us your complete praise of the guy as you're having him at number one.
Top 10 grade, only top 10 grade in this offensive line class. I think he's just a can't miss player for me. He's huge. He's so big, like 348 pounds, and he explodes. He's no slouch. I mean, I think you and I see him as different level of athletic capabilities, but I just see when he comes out of that snap and he just pounces on SEC defensive linemen. He was elite against every big time pass rush prospect he came up against. He absorbs power like nothing. And even when he was going up against sort of speedier defensive tackles, I felt like he held his own. I mean, I don't, it's hard to be super in love with a one-dimensional player. I get it. But that is a guy with an elite strength profile and an elite explosion profile for me. Like and I think it's just gonna come down to just, I thought it was amazing. I thought he was just one of the best run blockers I'd seen in the last like 2 or 3 years of scouting. I was extremely excited by his tape. I thought, and I mean, like, he's going to only be able to play guard. He's just that kind of dude. I don't think you can flex him out to tackle or anything. And I think at times he's a little bit of a, like, straight line guard guy. But he's unstoppable when a guy is aligned with him, and he mirrors super well. I think he just generally, like, I don't think he's getting enough credit for how well he adapts to what the guy is putting in front of him. I think he matches pass rush moves pretty well. I think he has a little bit of trouble with speed at times that I think will probably bother him in the NFL a little if he can't, I think he could maybe stand to shed 15 pounds and still be a 333 pound lineman who is still has that elite strength profile and mammoth. He can cut off some of the he doesn't have much bad weight, but if he can cut off just some and be a little bit of a better mover, which I think is definitely possible with a, NFL level nutrition program and strength and conditioning and all that. I don't know. I want him on the Jaguars so bad because our guards have been just so consistently like mid against the run. I watched his tape and I was like, yep, that's my guy. I want him. Like it felt like a moment of just awe seeing a guy who his base was perfect. His hands were out at the right time. His anchor was down and it wasn't being moved. I don't know. I was just very happy with him. I thought he was a just exceptional run blocker. I felt like he anchored down well in the pass game too. But I think you're really looking at him as a guy who can bulldoze open these run holes. Like I'm looking forward to seeing him, in the next draft. And I think he's going to be a guy who we talk about as the number one guard prospect. And I think, I don't know, this is bold. It wouldn't shock me if he goes sort of a Quentin Nelson range. I think he's just that kind of guy for me personally. It's lofty praise. Nelson was a generational guard prospect. I'm calling it. I love him.
And, I think there's easy to notice strength. I mean, he just completely negates all power when it comes in from the defensive linemen that are trying to attack him at the point of attack, and he just completely neutralizes them with efficiency. If he is going to lose some weight, hopefully he can hand it over to Parker Brailsford, a very good center, but like a 280-pound one guy. So definitely could maybe spare some for his teammate. But overall, I think he definitely has some really nice ability. And in a power scheme, he's going to be like a dominant offensive lineman. Mm-hmm. It's just as the league kind of trends more towards the, zone blocking, agility, kind of the lighter, nimble guys that can pull out and clear out space on the outside. That's where I kind of have some questions for him. I think he's going to be a divisive prospect in that aspect where there's going to be some guys that just love him because, when you get him in the right system, he's going to be a dominant guard. But then there's guys that are, kind of ingrained for what their team style is. And, like a 49er fan isn't going to watch Tyler Booker and be like, this is what we need. Like, they're going to be like, I think he's slow, I felt like there were some pass sets where there was a little bit of lumbering when it came to him getting back vertically. And I think there's some lateral speed issues. Moving forward, getting into the second level, I think he's very good. He's already shown enough athleticism in that regard. So it's just now getting that flexibility, that lateral ability, and just being able to drop it with a little bit more efficiency. And I think I'll be all in on. But yeah, I probably have Savaiinaea as like a higher as like a higher guard or Savaiinaea, but as a higher guard for me. But there's a lot of guys that's like, man, are they tackle or guard? Booker's just a guard, and you're content with that. Probably have Jackson higher. I think they're both very, very similar tiers for me. So it wouldn't shock me if Booker's more preferred by a team, maybe like, I'm just saying like a team. I don't think they're going to be low enough, but a team like Chicago, where they obviously kind of prefer that power and that strength on the offensive line. Maybe they would go for a guy like Booker, or like the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, another team that I don't expect to be in this range, but they kind of love that size and that just ability to kind of steamroll defenders. So it wouldn't shock me if there's teams that have Booker higher on their board, and I think it'll kind of be a little bit of variance between them. But I think both are very appealing guards and kind of make some intrigue for this class. Now moving on, though, to our number one ranked offensive lineman. I have him at number one. You have him at number two. Emery Jones, right tackle for the LSU Tigers. A lot of people view his teammate Will Campbell as a higher prospect. We feel otherwise. 6'6", 322 pounds, 34 and 1/4 inch arms. I don't know, man. This is someone that has great quickness at the snap, great, like, just nastiness as a blocker. He has a tremendous mean streak. He's able to toss guys extremely well off of blocks when they're in engagements, and I think that helps him extremely well whenever it comes to his engagements. He has some just ability to just completely like dismantle defenders and just completely take them out of the play to where they're not only like neutralized in the block, but also just completely ineffective to where they can't stop a run. They can't make a play on the ball if it, is thrown behind the line of scrimmage or anything like that. Jones is the epitome of consistency whenever it comes to offensive line play for me. I think he's one of the more efficient and play-to-play dependable offensive tackles in this class. He's someone I'm very excited about. I know he's a right tackle for the Tigers. I don't know. I was a little scared of switching guys from left tackle to right tackle after Evan Neal struggled with it, but we've seen in this class that teams aren't that worried about it, and I think that it's a little bit of an overreaction to Evan Neal. It wouldn't shock me if Emery Jones is drafted, moved over to left tackle in the NFL, and continues to be a stud.
Oh yeah, I think he was consistent. I think he was a mauler. I think we talk about all these guys earlier who maybe had only one of these traits, like a great pass protector, great athleticism, super strong mauler, nasty type of fella, like someone who has all the technical refinement. Emery Jones just has it all together. Like, it's a guy who I felt like was consistently, getting his like hands in the right spot. I felt like I nary saw a rep where he was like shooting too high or too low. I felt like he consistently timed his snap well, especially what you said about once they get him engaged. I think it's over. Like, if you're still fighting with Emery Jones about 2 seconds into a play, you're done. He's winning. Like the only way to get past Emery Jones is to get around him, because I would say he's a little bit of a not a below average athlete, but about an average athlete for the tackle position. I think there were certain like SEC linemen. I think Dallas Turner occasionally would line up against him and give him a hard time. But if you're talking about one of the best edge rushers in NCAA last year, being one of the only edge rushers who could give him a hard time, who cares? He's going to be set up for success in the NFL. I think he's got great size. He's got great length that just Campbell doesn't have on the other side. I think we're looking at a guy who just is constantly in control of his body and like is well balanced. I don't think I ever saw him get put on the ground. In fact, he was putting guys on the ground constantly just because his leverage was so good. Like, I don't know. It was just sort of everything has clicked for him. Like, his footwork's pretty like fast and he's able to move around pretty well. He's not someone who's limited to being in a full phone booth despite being a right tackle. I don't know. I felt like he wasn't like, and like, I think people are worried that he was not getting tested by the best like defensive linemen because they were focusing on Campbell. I don't think that's true. I think it was just a side dependent game. Like you'd watch certain games. I think his bigger ticket games, he was up against like lesser defensive linemen. But I think if you go through the rest of his tape, he's up against some great guys. Like it's SEC level talent. We're going to see great talent at all sections of the game. So I don't know. I'm just not worried. Like it's a guy who I watched and I was like, yeah, pretty clearly an NFL talent, pretty clearly a guy who can push guys to the ground and can still match up with them. I think he could play well in a power scheme. I think he could play well in a zone scheme. I don't know. It was just a guy I wasn't worried about. I thought he was, quick steps. He was very aggressive. And I think he just, is able to do both. He's able to be a strong power guy who can push guys to the ground. And he's able to be a guy who can mirror and match athletically and get to the outside and push guys sort of around the pocket. So, and especially since he's going to have a new freshman quarterback this year in Nussmeier, who showed some flashes near the end of the year. I don't know. I think there's reason to be excited about like Nussmeier because Emery, Jones, and Campbell are going to be his blindside blockers because both of those guys are very well protected in that regard. And I think you're going to see a lot more of Nussmeier rolling out to the right than he is to the left because of it. Like just because Emery's going to be a better pocket protector for him.
Yeah, well, that is all we have for the top offensive linemen in this class. That's Dean Bruce. I'm Michael Rochman. Next time you see us, we'll be talking about the sleeper offensive linemen. But that is the 2-minute drill. Take care, guys.
Have a good one.